Okay, good morning, everyone. As usual, Senke, is the sound okay? You hear me? All right. So I'm so delighted to celebrate this Earth Day this year and see all of you here. And it's lovely to have Genko join us from Dharma Rain, wearing her beautiful green rakusu with us. And all of you here and all of you who will be listening to this recording, and everyone who is celebrating this human life so integrated into the natural world, our true body. So I'll begin by just honoring the Kalapuya people, whose ancestral lands are the lands upon which we practice in this moment. And I just learned recently, I don't know why I didn't know this, but a lot of people think that the Willamette Valley, the word William, looks very European, but it actually comes from a Kalapuya word Willamut, which means where the river ripples and runs fast. Isn't that beautiful? To be so integrated with the love and care of the waters which surround you is where hopefully we are going. So this is a joyous Earth Day, not without its pain and suffering. I've been, as I've been sharing with many of you, inspired by listening to environmental Buddhist leaders from all over speak on this summit this week. And although I have heard what they communicated in content before, the felt sense of being with them, and hundreds of people, they began each session with people putting in the chat where they were from. And so you saw people from Ecuador and Chile and France. And there was this sensibility of not being alone. And I want to speak a little bit to this day as we move to our ceremony this morning. Paul Hawkins, who some of you might know his name, longtime environmentalist and activist and business owner, talked about when he went to write a book called Blessed Unrest. It's a beautiful title, Blessed Unrest of Our Time. He said that if he noticed if you read the news, the Times, whatever you look at, the Post, you wouldn't think that there was much being done. Daily disasters and overwhelming conditions of the Earth's ecology. And so what he did was he got a grant, and he gathered the names with a team of people of organizations all over the world who were working on environmental issues, all over. And he started on the computer to list those names, that organization, you might say Cascadia Wildlands, working in so and so, here's the address. And he began to list those. And he created it's a bit of an art by having those names scroll. So an average reader could then read the thing and the name would come up. And he said that eventually, as he finished the project, it would take, I can't remember exactly, but something like 10 days from morning to night to watch all of these names scroll. Watch them all scroll. That's how many people are awakening on this planet at this moment, that we do not see because of the fragmentation of the way that we create the media of the world. So we can listen to what that does instantly to our hearts. To not be alone in this condition is actually the response. So I love that, even though I'm a farmer and work with the land, the fact that we even need an Earth Day, that's quite profound, but let's take it. We need to stop. We need to stop and simply be with. And so hence inviting this morning to bring on the cushion something that you love. Because one thing that I heard from those who spoke was, it will be the love of this land and the recognition of our true human body that will sustain us, not our rage. It'll be the love that carries us forward. So we can be interested in what it is like to slow down and simply, without fixing or changing anything, invite into our hearts that which we love. For me, I hadn't planned anything, and so just what instantly popped up was the creek that feeds the farm that we irrigate from, and that has salmon that spawn in it, and over the years has been lowering and is threatened, in addition to the salmon and also by pollution. So if your whatever you call to mind was anything like my experience, first there's a love and appreciation and gratitude, all the vegetables. Without the creek, no vegetables off the farm. Every carrot, lettuce head is full of the water from that creek that freely flows, amazing, out of springs, even in the worst drought year, keeps flowing. And then the heart wrenches with the concern and grief. What happens if it keeps lowering and lowering? What will happen to those fish? So I want to speak this morning to how we can hold this moment. I had a great experience with Genko yesterday. We were that speaks to how we get stuck. And the stuckness comes when we see something so overwhelming, and our gut human small self reaction is, what can I do? What can I possibly do? And so Genko and I took a walk, lovely in the neighborhood, to go to Laughing Planet for dinner. And so sweet with the gardens, to really nice walk from here. And we passed a woman who was planting in her planters out by the road. And she had all these plants, had yet to put them in the ground. And we both stopped and turned and we're like, wow, that's going to be just beautiful. And she looked up and she said, I went and I bought every blue and gold flower I could find. and I thought, my first thought was like, well, you must really like those colors. Sorry for everybody else, but that was my first instant. And then I said, aha. And we both stopped and Genko got it right away. And I said, even though it's not mine to give you, thank you on behalf of the Ukrainian people. That's what she did. That's what she did. And whether we think that matters or not says everything about our consciousness, everything about how we face this planet. One thing we know as Buddhists or one thing we're gifted with, is that we have a practice that points to the very dis-ease that undergirds all of our institutions and the way that we move through the world. That is at the heart and the driving force of how we can continue to kill off what we depend on. It's truly a disease, right? An addiction, words, that's an addiction. When we continue to work against our own life, this is a serious koan for us human beings. And we're all asking that question, how can we continue? And there are many lenses that are all good lenses. There are political and economic and activist lenses that speak to the problems and hurdles, and I respect all of those. But for me on this seat, I come back to the deepest root, and that is the moment of the crisis of meaning. It has everything to do with whether we see ourselves as separate from nature, as individuals, as helpless, or whether we see ourselves embedded in the world, deeply embedded and together. That our living right now is the response, if we see it correctly. Our being here together in this way is the response to the creek that's running low, if we see it correctly. Our planting flowers in the garden box is the response to this world, if we see it correctly. With the eye of no separation, not fixing or solving, but Buddhism and our precepts speak to complete engagement, wholehearted engagement, and invite us to have a heart that can hold equally the joy and the pain, equally, together. Not one at the expense of the other, but actually one that feeds the other. That we can let our grief feed our love, and our love acknowledge our grief. This crisis of meaning is not a Buddhist thing. It is a fundamental identity of who we are. We have been taught, especially in contemporary culture and modern world, that we can actually take things from the world without consequence. How insane is that? You wouldn't let your kid just go and eat anything in the fridge and say, you'll feel fine after that whole chocolate cake. Consequences, we learn that as children. But we're still children as adults in this way. And we're still pretending that can continue. Joanna Macy said that she observed that we've been taught the world is two things, the natural world. It's either our supply store or a sewer. That's impossible. We have not woken up to what it truly is, which is our human body, although more and more, all of those organizations scrolling through and saying we must change our minds. We must become something else. Crisis of meaning, this is what we take up in Zen. It's answering the questions, who are we and what are we here to do? That's the fundamental spiritual question. What is this experience and what's mine to do? And that relates to how then we define what the good life is. I don't know about you, but I grew up in a fairly traditional American family, and the good life, what love meant to them was to advance their working class status and to gather security through things, to be a good enough person. So it was in a religious context. That was American religion, which is still dominates a lot of the engine behind our accumulation. But that will not hold anymore. And it's not a great vision, although there was love there, if we find it. I heard a talk the other day, someone said, if we want to build bridges to people on the other side of the political divide, understand that they love their children and they want safety for them. That's a good place to start for a bridge. Want something. But simply the options that they had were not in context, the biggest context of how we exist. Paul Hawkins was talking about how we should change our metaphors we are using to talk about the environment. It is not a thing to use or even to save. It is not a resource. The natural world exists in its own intrinsic value in life. Its value and worth is its existence. And many indigenous peoples all over the world have known this for a long time and practiced in this way. And we can do this. So today, it is through ceremony. I've been wanting to do this for a long time. So I'm so grateful. Thank you. 100 bows to Josu, who sewed up until an hour ago this gorgeous green raksu. I don't know about you, but everyone who walks in the courtyard goes, wow. Like the first Zen teacher they see is right there. And I did too, when Bill and I looked at this property to buy, walked in the courtyard and said, wow, you're arrested, right there, it's there. And as we do kinhin outside and it's shaded us, we've been integrated, and yet have we ever really, I know we've done some art projects, have we ever really looked, ever really seen and acknowledged this being that is so integrated with our practice here? So it's through more and more, and I'm sorry, I know Genji would be here if she could, she's away, and continually looks at artistic expressions that bring us into this new mind. It's the artists and poets who are really creating a bridge for us to move into a new paradigm called for. And one of the pieces that I love, I forget her name, she's an Iranian artist. She draws pictures of traditional women like hugging species that are endangered. This beautiful art. And directly that says something to us, that we can be with, through the expression of art, we can become larger and hold these conditions so that every way we move, it becomes us. Every choice we make, whether we have the power as a politician to make policy, or we have the choice in a grocery store to forego the pork chop for the broccoli. Well, not a good, for the tofu slab. Let's get some protein in there, some almonds. So this ceremony today, I put together very simply, but it comes from, and many of you might know this from in the 80s, where the Thai monks, in order to save a forest from being cut, took and ordained the trees. And so once the trees were ordained, that so went against the culture respect. Here it wouldn't work. They take off the rope and cut it. But there was enough of a cultural inhibition to say, we can't cut these trees. We have now ordained them, and they are part of this. And so as this was evolving, and I've been talking about it for the last couple of years, I think it was Koan who asked, at first I said, let's induct it into the Sangha, welcome it as a member of the Sangha, which it is. But then Koan said, what if it doesn't want to do that? Did you ask it? I said, really good point. In fact, that's not what we're doing. We're actually extending a gift today to recognize the tree as Buddha, as a great teacher. Just in the same way that we sow and give raksus to others. That's a tradition we have, is to sow and give a raksu. It makes you an honorary, professor, or whatever we call it, what do you call it, an honor?
Emeritus.
An emeritus, or someone who's given an honorary degree.
Right.
That we recognize this being who stands in for all beings. So this incense cedar, we don't know how old it is.
We need to cut it down.
Nice suggestion. Good idea, Juka. You weren't listening. Demerit, so. That's nice. Michael's here with his son. As I looked up, I was just sort of thinking of the time. These trees, the incense cedars, one thing I learned about them is they are a tree for our time, because they're incredibly drought resistant, and the bark, in the way it's formed, is really fire resistant. So they can live to up to 500 years, and they are native, but there aren't as many incense cedars, for whatever reason, probably ecological, in the wild anymore. So many of them are in more protected places. And so I began to think of this tree. If this tree was even, it may be 50, but it may be 200 years old. Yeah. If it was 200 years old, this tree would have been here before Eugene was Eugene. It would have been here with the Kalapuya people who were burning the open grass fields here to grow camas food. This tree would have been here. This tree would have seen Eugene Skinner develop this land, and white people move in and push out the indigenous people. This tree would have seen the Civil War. This tree would have seen the Trail of Tears. We know this tree probably saw the atomic bomb. So we think of a tree, even a relatively young incense cedar. Look at the history it holds outside of our usual human thinking. And if this tree is 200 years, what if it has another 300? At 300 years, should there be conditions for life still on planet, all of us, most of us, will have been forgotten. All the emails, the Dharma talks, all of the sweeping and cleaning, what trace of us will be there? But trace. This tree holds deep time already. So what we're doing today is no small, unimportant act. It checks the delusion that the natural world or nature or the earth is somehow separate from us and we can save it or not. That's a deluded view. We are the earth. Everything we do every day is part of the earth, is integrated. And if we switch our eyes to the sacred eyes of nature, just like indigenous people know, it's impossible to pollute a river you've been taught is your brother or sister. It's very hard. Versus, oh, that's a certain amount of water that goes to feed our sanitation plant. It flows at this rate and we can do this and that. Even with the look of preservation or conservation, we miss something deeper. So I want to close with a poem from Joanna Macy. Joanna Macy was a Rilke translator.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
And Rilke is really beautiful. And it speaks to, it's an invitation to hold the joy and grief and move into a way of being beyond our Western thinging mindset that makes objects we can manipulate, and to open up to the natural world, which Rilke was his really insight into his spiritual world for what it truly is. So this poem she read, it's called Let This Darkness Be a Bell Tower. Quiet friend who has come so far, feel how your breathing makes more space around you. Let this darkness be a bell tower, and you the bell. As you ring, what batters you becomes your strength. Move back and forth into the change. What is it like? Such intensity of pain. If the drink is bitter, turn yourself into wine. In this uncontainable night, be the mystery at the crossroads of your senses. The meaning discovered there. And if the world has ceased to hear you, say to the silent earth, I flow. To the rushing water, speak, I am. If the world has ceased to hear you, say to the silent earth, I flow. To the rushing water, speak, I am. Laura, you can stop the recording. So we're going to take a moment to go around as usual.